This is Digital Marketing Depot broadcasting live. I'm Karen Burka, your webinar producer. Thank you for joining us today for Protect Your Brand. The best defense is a good offense. We are very pleased to welcome Frederick Vallaeys, CEO at Optymyzr, and Ashley Fletcher, Vice President of Marketing for Adthena. Now, before I turn the webinar over to our speakers, I have a few things I want to tell you. If you need some help or have a question for our speakers, just use the Q&A box, and we will do our best to help you. If you want to tell a friend, check out our sponsor, Adthena, or Digital Marketing Depot. There are some widgets at the bottom of your screen. Just click on them, and they will take you where you want to go. Remember that you can customize your audience console to move or resize any windows that you have open. Now, we are going to hear a lot of great content today, so I wanted to let you know we are recording this broadcast, and we will make it available for viewing on demand this afternoon. I'll send an email out when it's ready. So with that business taken care of, let me make some more formal introductions. Frederick Vallaeys is an expert in the online marketing field and was an early employee at Google, where he was instrumental in growing the AdWords search marketing system. He is currently the CEO of Optymyzr, a SaaS company delivering advanced PPC optimization tools and reports to AdWords and Bing Ads advertisers worldwide. Ashley Fletcher's career has been honed in search for over 10 years. He started out agency side as the head of online marketing at Coast Digital and then at BeatThatQuote.com, leading its in-house marketing team. Now, audience, you can see more complete bios and contact information for our speakers on the left side of your console. Remember, if you have questions for our industry experts, please make good use of that Q&A box. I'll get to as many of those questions live after the formal presentation. So with that, I am going to turn the webinar over to Frederick to get us started. Here you go, Frederick.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thanks everyone for attending today's session. So why did everyone show up for a webinar about protecting your brand online? Obviously, you guys get it. Your brand is very valuable. When I was at Google, I joined Google in 2002, and in those early days, the brand was actually one of the few advertisers that was eligible to participate in online ads on the Google search results. They had this product that was called AdWords Premium, and you had to buy the ads on a CPM basis. It was very expensive. You had to make phone calls. So it was very similar to traditional marketing that people were used to. And so that kind of meant that the brands were the ones dominating the search results pages. But then they came out with AdWords Select around the year that I joined, so around 2002. And all of a sudden, online advertising became really accessible to just about anyone who had a business and a website. And that was really exciting. That's really what grew the whole AdWords experience. But then now we're seeing the pendulum swinging back the other way a little bit. It turns out that nowadays, with fewer ad slots on the page, with more competition, the brand is actually really important again. If you have a strong brand, it's going to make it easier for you to get really good results from digital marketing. And I think it kind of plays into what we're seeing in the news these days, right? People want trust. People want experiences where they know what they're going to get, something that they know they're going to have, whether it be a great coffee from Starbucks. Is it the best coffee in the world? Not necessarily, but they trust the fact that that coffee will be the same whether they buy it in Singapore, Paris, or San Francisco. Right? And so that's one element of brand. Consumers are looking to brands because they know what they're going to get. They have that trust factor. And the other thing that's really interesting about brand, and I was reading about this in the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago, is that the way companies are valued these days has really shifted. It used to be looking very much at, the bottom line, how much money was in the bank. But nowadays, it's really shifted towards some of the intangibles. So how many patents does a company have? How strong is the brand that a company has? And so for that reason, even if you just want to make your business stronger, it's really important to have a strong brand. And as you're building that through digital marketing, you also want to protect it. And that's really what this webinar is about today, because the risks to your brand, if you market online, are very, very real. And so some of the headlines that we see that really illustrate this have to do with the bigger companies. So here Procter & Gamble said they cut $140 million of online ad spending because they were concerned about brand safety. And then Unilever made basically the same sort of threat. They said, hey, Google, hey, Facebook, if you don't clean up what's happening online, if you don't protect our brand, we're going to pull out. We're not going to advertise with you anymore. And at the same time, from the consumer perspective, it's a little bit the same thing. The consumer is starting to become aware that there's fake news. Thank you, President Trump, for making that such a household term, but it's basically true, right? So fake news is out there, and if you don't know that what you're reading is trustworthy, and then you get some brand advertising next to something that's actually fake news, how does that reflect on the brand? So the consumers are concerned, the brands are concerned, and that's why we got to talk about this topic. And it's a little bit of a newer topic, but I'm really happy that you're here today to see what we can do about protecting your brand online. Now, I see 3 specific risk factors to your brand when you're online. And the first really has to do with scale. So there are more channels and more placements than ever that you need to monitor. So your job to protect a brand used to be somewhat simple, but it's become way more complicated. And Ashley is going to have a lot of good insight on how you can actually tactically protect your brand. But the second risk factor that I see is around automation and artificial intelligence. So AI and PPC, it's a bit of a buzzword. It used to be big data was all the rage. Now everybody keeps talking about artificial intelligence. In fact, it's in every contract when I have to go and speak. They're like, you have to mention AI. Right? It's just the thing these days. But there's actually something to this, because with artificial intelligence, decisions are automated. They have no empathy. Things move at breakneck speed, and all of a sudden something that was sort of a minor risk in the past can now become a huge risk because things are moving so quickly and because humans are not necessarily in control of everything anymore. And then the third factor is just plain competition, right? If you have a strong brand, well, guess what? Your competitors want to vie to overtake your brand. They want to be the best brand. They want to have the best position. And so we're seeing a lot of that in terms of search growth. Spending on search is growing, on display is growing, and all of that just means there's more competition to look out for, because some of these competitors, they might be doing some nefarious things that you're not aware of, and if you don't pay attention, it can actually hurt your brand as well and your position. So let me jump into the first risk factor here that we have. So this is about scale. And again, when I joined Google in 2002, things were pretty easy, right? You basically bought a bunch of keywords. You knew exactly what queries they would show up for. And that was it. That was all you had to monitor. But then Google came out with the Google Display Network, and all of a sudden display advertising became huge. And, they would automatically put your placements, your ads on different websites. Okay, so then we had that under control. And now all of a sudden, everybody starts to use the iPhone that came out 10 years ago. Okay, now everybody's in apps. Now everybody's on their mobile phone. And all of a sudden, that overtakes people doing searches and using the internet on a desktop device. So now we have to worry about our ads showing up in apps. And as if that's not enough, people are now consuming over an hour a day of online video. Tons of ads are run against these videos, and it's yet another place that we have to monitor. So it's not just the multiplication of the channels, but it's also the number of individual placements available within these channels that makes this such a complicated job. And so when we look specifically at display, and we can really equate it to the growth of the internet in general. So how many websites are out there today? Well, some estimates say it's about 1.7 billion websites. It's billion with a B. Now, if you look at the Google Display Network, which is just one of the many ways of having your ad show up on those many websites, they specifically say they have 2 million websites. By the way, when Google says they have 2 million websites, they probably have a lot more than that. They're just being conservative, right? So that's 2 million places where your ad can show. By the way, some of these 2 million places, these are websites, but each of these websites could have user-generated content. Think about YouTube. That's one placement, but there's thousands upon thousands of creators of videos, and some of those videos on that one website may actually not be great for your brand to show next to. And then on the Google Display Network, you also get 650,000 apps, and that kind of leads into the whole app element. But now, a lot of these apps are being built, and they're being monetized through advertising. Okay, and so even if you figured, well, we've kind of done a good job of figuring out which apps we can show our ads in without being too concerned about the brand, well, on a daily basis, every single day, there's more than 6,000 new apps being released into the app stores. And so that's a huge number, right? So these are 6,000 potential new placements on a daily basis where your ads could show and maybe show up next to something that's not going to make you very happy, that's going to hurt your brand because, maybe something was offensive, was lewd, didn't resonate with customers. So The other angle that makes this a little bit complicated is it used to be that you could go to Google as recently as about a month ago, and you could just say, hey, Google, I don't want to show my ads on mobile apps, and that was the end of that. Now, I'm not a fan of that. I don't want to just wholesale exclude something because there could be good placements across these mobile devices. And in fact, there's a quote right here, but oftentimes marketers might be too sensitive. They might say, well, this whole app space, it's too risky. We're not going to advertise on it at all. But one of the beauties of the online advertising ecosystem is that with so many websites, so many apps, there's actually this whole long tail effect. So you can get tons of traffic at really good prices if you take the time to figure out which ones of those apps or display placements are actually valuable. So there's a lot you can do with that. But back to my previous point for a second. So Google is actually making it harder for you to exclude showing in these types of places. And here's an article from about a month ago where they said, well, we're now going to quote unquote simplify targeting, but actually through that simplification, the other thing I've underlined is you may see a significant increase in mobile apps. So basically they're saying by default, you're going to be in on the mobile apps, and it's not going to be that easy anymore to just turn it off as a wholesale thing. And again, I think they're doing the right thing because you have to think about this as a potentially valuable place to advertise. But here we're talking about brand. And so now it's just one more place where you have to worry about, is my brand showing up next to something that I don't want it to show up? And then the same thing happens with video. And video is probably kind of the area where we see most of the articles around people not being super happy with how the brand is positioned next to something. But video is huge, right? So it's only getting bigger. So there's a projection of $30 billion being spent on online video this year, and that's a 27% growth from the year before. Why is it growing so fast? Well, it's because people watch a lot of video. By 2020, it looks like people are going to watch about 84 minutes of online video on any given day. And so, of course, that usage is between mobile devices, between desktop devices. And a lot of that viewing is also happening on Facebook where videos autoplay. But that's still a really large number that you have to look at. And then kind of across the board, if you ask advertisers, is this a growing part of your business? They say, yes, it is. The majority of them say they will spend more on online video. So it's also something you have to pay attention to because as you double down the money, you double down the placements. And so that just means you have to watch twice as many placements to make sure that you can trust them. And this is the point that not all videos can be trusted, right? So there's actually a study out there that says that about 10% of online video placements pose a negative adjacency risk. And that simply means your ad is being shown on a channel or next to a video that is offensive, lewd, hateful, or something else that's not going to reflect great on your brand. And so one kind of angle on that is that influencers actually account for about 84% of YouTube views in the first quarter of 2018. So one strategy you could take is you could say, listen, I'm just going to try to target those influencers that I know generally put out really good, really positive content. Now, that still leaves 16% of all the views that are happening that are not necessarily by the biggest influencers. That could be cheap traffic. So if you can find ways to still target that and still protect your brand at the same time, that is actually a huge opportunity. And by the way, 16% in and of itself, that doesn't sound like a whole lot. But, when I used to work at Google, one day we would go and do a 2% improvement to search results or CTR. And these are small numbers, but they're on such a big base that 2% of something really huge was actually really huge in and of itself. And so that's kind of the opportunity here, right? So don't think about 16% as a small number. Think about it as a small percentage of a huge, huge thing, which is still very big by itself. And so these video apps display, that's what we all know about, but now we have people starting to do voice searches. And so ComScore says 50% of all searches by 2020 are going to be done by voice. Now that's interesting because a lot of these results will still show up on screens. It'll just be a different sort of screen that maybe sits in your kitchen, on a smart speaker, that type of thing. But these are just new opportunities where you can get new customers, but you can also hurt your brand because if it shows up in the wrong context, that's another thing you have to monitor. And so that's sort of the whole issue with scale. Now, the second brand risk is automation and artificial intelligence. And so the first thing here has to do with imperfect goals, and the second with excessive speed. Imperfect goals, what that means is if you tell the computer system to help you achieve a certain goal, like get me more conversions, improve my click-through rate, improve my conversion rate, and you don't put any limiting factors around that, well, the system will help you achieve that goal, but they may not do it in a way that actually makes you very happy. So let me show you some examples. So through machine learning, Google is able to place ads contextually on the display network. And what that means is contextual means whatever you're advertising, if a page seems to be talking about the same thing, then you're eligible to show an ad. So let me show you some examples. So here, 250 people get sick after eating at an Indiana Olive Garden. And boom, there's an ad, free dinner for two at Olive Garden. Yes, that's contextual, but is that really the best place for your ad to show? Or how about this one? 11-year-old gets charged for driving drunk. And there's an ad that says, hooray, beer. Okay, contextually relevant, but sort of lacking the empathy, sort of lacking the human insight that maybe that was not the best place to show this ad. Or how about this one? A teacher gets hit by a car outside of a school. It's kind of hard to see the ad here, but at the bottom, like this guy pops up wearing a Toyota t-shirt. Yay, Toyota, we hit teachers outside schools, right? That's not exactly what you want to do. And so the whole point here is if you just give a computer system a goal, but no restrictions around that goal, yes, they will do what you tell it to do, but they will sort of lack the context that us humans have, and so we really have to watch out for that. And then there's also brands advertising on hate channels. So why do brands advertise on hate channels? Clearly not because that's what they're targeting, but nowadays you can target so many ways. You can target based on keywords, geography, time of day, audience, whether somebody's been to your site before through remarketing, device type. So you have all this targeting that people have to do, that you have to do. And one thing that you might not realize is that through all this targeting, all of a sudden, here you have DreamWorks advertising the Boss Baby movie on a site that's hateful against Jews, right? Clearly, DreamWorks didn't advertise towards this channel. That's not where they wanted to show up, but through all of the other targeting they did, accidentally they showed up on here. And so that's something that you have to pay attention to. And so specifically brand safety on YouTube is a big deal. So that the whole Procter & Gamble, at one point they were saying 140 million, and it turned out to be $200 million that they pulled, but their chief brand officer basically said, we are concerned about ad fraud, advertising clutter, brand safety issues, and so we're pulling down all of this advertising. Now, personally, when I hear a big brand like that pulling off of YouTube, I'm like, sweet, that opens up a lot of inventory that I can now buy at a cheaper price. If I'm smart enough to actually figure out how to deal with these issues that Procter & Gamble didn't want to deal with. So I wrote a script, and the script basically says, as soon as any of my ads start to show up next to a video, we pull the data from that video, how many thumbs up, how many thumbs down, and if there's too high of a ratio of thumbs down, we'll just automatically exclude it as a placement. So we're being proactive about reducing the risk towards the brand. Anything that has too many thumbs down, we don't care why they have thumbs down, we'll just take the video off because it seems to be a controversial video in some way. Now, of course, the engines themselves, they're also taking this very seriously because $200 million, that's still a lot of money for Google. Even for Google, that's a lot of money. So they've taken down a lot of videos. Facebook has taken down a lot of fake accounts. And both of these companies have upwards of 7,000 people specifically working to do brand safety and content safety, right? So they're content moderators who look at videos, who look at posts, who look at accounts to make sure nothing nefarious stays up there and then shows ads next to it. So my third risk factor is about competition in search. And this, if you ever go to the lobby of Google, they have this basically butcher paper where the engineers started drawing how many searches were happening. And they did that in the really early days, but you can still see it. It's very cool. But I put that up there just to illustrate the fact that the number of searches for many, many years now has been growing, but that growth has slowed. So the red line on this graph shows you how many searches happen every year. The blue line is how much money is being spent in the US on those searches. And so you see the blue line going up faster. So what that means is more dollars are being spent per search. So that tells me there's more competition for these searches. So you have to pay attention because if you don't, you're going to fall by the wayside. Now, why is there more competition? Well, it's pretty simple, right? In 2014, you do a search, your whole page above the fold was basically ads. Now you do that same search in 2018, and you just have the 4 ads at the top. There's no more ads on the right-hand side. And that was the whole shift, too, from brands being brands were less important when you had like 12 search results on a page because basically everyone could get on page 1. Now it's back down to just 4 above the search results. It makes it much harder. If you look at the same thing on mobile devices, it's even worse for advertisers, right? I mean, there's only 1 ad that can show up above before you start scrolling. So it's really, really competitive to get those top positions. And then the other thing that you have to think about as a brand is how are you measuring value? Are you looking at lifetime value of what you're driving? Because I talk to advertisers very, very frequently. And it's not uncommon for me to hear someone say, well, I don't understand what's happening because I'm bidding at the highest level that I could possibly bid, and I'm still not getting position 1 or the position that I want. And so they say, well, how are my competitors able to do this? Well, the only way that your competitors can do it is either they have a more efficient business, so they've negotiated better rates with their suppliers, they have better rates with the shipping companies, whatever that is, or they measure value differently. If you're measuring value as a last click attribution and basically the 1 sale that comes from that 1 click versus your competitor measures the lifetime value they're going to get from that client, well, the lifetime value is obviously going to be bigger, so they can afford to spend more. So take attribution very seriously, because if you don't and your competitors measure things more completely than you do, it allows them to bid more aggressively. And so then a couple of final things to watch out for when it comes to brand safety is that people are going more and more into automation. So I'm very big on writing scripts in AdWords. And, you know, we've seen scripts and they do the following. They say automatically look at my search query report, find any search terms that have a good CTR and add them as keywords to my account. So even if you have a gentleman's agreement with your competitor that they will not buy your branded keywords, well, guess what? This script doesn't know about that gentleman's agreement, and all of a sudden it finds a high CTR term, which has your competitor's name in it, and boom, it gets added to their account. So you thought everything was good, but all of a sudden they were actually competing with you and driving up your price. And then out-of-control bid automation, that's another one to be careful about. So Google makes available something like seven different bidding methodologies, automations. On the left side, I call them vanity bidding, so it's really about position, it's about outranking competitors. And so with target outrank, it means I want to be ahead of a certain competitor. So that's a good strategy, but what if the other competitor, if my competitor says the same thing, they want to outrank me, so now I'm trying to outbid you and you're trying to outbid me. Well, guess who wins in this? It's Google, because both of the advertisers can bid to the maximum amount. Only one of them ends up being happy because only one can win that auction. And so, you know, it's not great if you don't monitor this, because you're just going to end up spending more money without necessarily getting the results that you want, and you might lose out to your brand competitor. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a strategy which is, I think, much more reasonable. It's smart bidding. It's based on conversion data. But this one says it's maximize conversions. Now, the way maximize conversions works, if you read the details on Google, is that it'll basically try to spend your entire budget without regard to your CPA or ROAS targets. So you'll get a whole bunch of clicks and conversions that are at a reasonable rate. But all of a sudden, Google says, well, now it's getting really hard for me to drive more conversions. But you told me just maximize conversions, and I still have $5,000 left to spend. So I'll just buy these really expensive conversions. And so the bids basically go up. If your competition's using this and you're ahead of your competition, it's going to force up your price as well, right? So these are the things. This is the speed with which the system is operating. It's being automated, and you really have to pay attention, because people don't realize how everything is interconnected and strange things start to happen. So at the end of the day, where does that leave us? Well, digital advertising clearly is a double-edged sword. It's a brand builder, but it can also be a brand killer if you don't pay attention. So don't lose sight of the risks that are involved. And so that's why we're having this webinar. So I think we have a poll question, so I'm going to turn it over to Karen, and we'll get to hear about what kind of brand risks you're facing.
Thank you, Frederick. That was some great information. And yes, we want to learn a little bit more. Audience, now that you're aware of the kind of risks that are out there, or maybe you're already aware of those risks, and that's why you're here today. So we'd like to be able to address your particular needs as Ashley Fletcher comes on in a couple of minutes. So here's our question. Have you experienced any type of online brand attack, and how proactive have you been in protecting your brand safety? So I'm going to read these 4 responses, and we need you to choose one. Have you not experienced any types of attack, and maybe you're just here to learn more about the topic? Maybe you've seen some suspicious activity online, but you're not sure how to respond to it. Maybe your brand has been attacked several times and you need to learn how to prevent it, and that's why you're here, to hear the great tactical information we're going to be providing. Or maybe things are even worse than that brand attacks online have become a serious problem and you have implemented some preventative measures against it. So think about those responses. I want to give you a couple of reminders while you respond and click on the right answer. We are recording the broadcast, so we will have it available on demand for you later today if you want to go back and see some of these great slides or hear the comments from Frederick and Ashley again. And also want to remind you that we are going to have some time for live Q&A after Ashley finishes his formal remarks. So please, if you've got some questions, get them into us. And before I bring Ashley on, I do want to remind everyone that Ashley's also formerly with Google as well, when his previous company, beatthatquote.com, was acquired by Google in 2011. And Ashley stayed on and led marketing for the company's finance and insurance comparison products across global markets. So we've got 2 speakers here today with some great Google experience. So I wanted to make sure you all knew that as Ashley prepares to speak with us in a couple of seconds now. So let's go ahead and take a look at these poll results, and I will introduce Ashley Fletcher to come on with me and take a look. So it looks like, actually most of our attendees today have been lucky enough not to experience any kind of brand attacks, almost half, and they really want to learn more and maybe learn how to prevent this. But we do have about 35% altogether that have maybe had a brand attack or have problems with brand attacks and really want to do something to prevent it. So is that typically what you see out in the marketplace? People just want to be proactive, or we've already seen a lot of problems with these kind of brand attacks?
Yeah, that's great feedback. I think the analysis there shows in most cases people don't know that this problem's actually going on. So if you think about it from a macro perspective, what is the impact of someone bidding on your brand in various states and things like that? They may not be aware of the damage that it's doing. So getting access to that transparency is, or getting that transparency in what's going on in your whole market is really key here. So yes, we do hear actually that there isn't, people aren't aware of the damage it's doing. So I'm not totally surprised by the first result in there.
All right, good. Well, let's get right into some of the great information you're going to provide to help our audience do something about these attacks.
Great, thank you. And thanks again to Frederick. It was a really great presentation there, and there's some really strong parallels between what we do with competitive intelligence and linking back to those brand risks, so the scale, the automation, and more importantly, obviously, the competition. So thanks again for dialing in today. So let's take a moment to look at the evolution of brand search from a CMO's perspective. So what is keeping the CMO awake at night? So the first point, 80% of marketing heads that we've surveyed are worried about brand safety. And the second point, brand safety is now number 2. It's a second highest priority below transparency and above ad fraud. So it's a really big issue. It's on everyone's minds at the moment, and it's getting more and more prominent. And in light of that, as touched on by Frederick as well, Google are really trying to take active measures in protecting this. So the metric we have is 3.2 billion ads were taken down by Google last year. Yes, it may seem an enormous number on screen now in the presentation, but as I work through my story, you'll see actually they're not doing a great job at all. So we know that the CMOs have got a pretty poor REM cycle at the moment, and we need to help rebuild that. And as Frederick said, AI, machine learning, automation, they're all the buzzwords at the moment, but they're all being adopted. So we know that's part of the solve. We also need to do this at scale. We need to make it work to the single data point that these CMOs crave. They need to leverage the technology that can work with their technical suite, and more importantly, work with their team who are no doubt maxed out, trying to put out all of these issues. So here is how this works in practice. So it's very common these days to have some form of AI machine learning part of your digital stack. So here's how we see it helping the CMOs and rebuilding their important REM cycle. So from a people perspective, yes, it is very easy to understand the context and semantics of when someone bids on your brand. If you were an insurer and you were State Farm and you saw Progressive appearing on your brand, yes, we can spot that. But what it doesn't do is spotting all of the instances at a national, state and city level. It's impossible for a human to do this at scale, especially if you have 1,000 brand-related terms in different markets, different states, different cities, multiplied by devices across every hour of the day. It simply can't be done by a human. But humans are very good at reacting to these one-on-one scenarios. So yes, they can spot an instance where a competitor can bid on their brand. Yes, they may have a better offer appearing in the brand or something like that and react there. So, those instances are in place and they can react accordingly. And sandwiched in the middle there is the rules-based automation. So again, what you heard earlier with the AdWords scripts is really talking to that. And we only hear that coming up in some instances, but from our perspective, it's a very reactive measure. If a CMO asks the head of digital or the head of search, how are you reacting to that competitor that's aggressively bidding? And you said, well, I have a script in place on my brand terms. Every time they appear, I'm just going to bid up 10%. That is a very, very reactive measure. But it's also very short-sighted because, as Frederick highlighted, you're just lining Google's pockets there because it is essentially a race to the top and you'll be increasing the CPCs for everyone. So enter machine learning. So it does understand context and semantics at scale. It can monitor all of these aspects in real time at scale as well. And you can, if it's smart enough and based on the core data, respond to new scenarios and detection. But really there, it's only as good as the data that you put into it. So where you go out and get this data at scale is really, really key to making the machine smarter. So here's an example of how teamwork can make the dreams work for the CMOs. So as you've seen in some of the examples, Google Ads are running out these mechanisms where you can combine the human element and combine the machine element as well. So here's the example with brand safety. A human can select these rules to go out and allow the machine to simply go out and bucket these and hope that you don't fall into these gaps or appear on any hate channels or things like that. So again, you're really dependent on the machine executing this, but what these types of solutions prove is there's a real lack of transparency. You're being very, very trusted in Google to do the right thing here, to show you on the right terms and to protect your brand accordingly. And sadly, that just isn't happening, particularly in search. So before we go into three of the threats, I just wanted to highlight, what lengths would you go to protect your brand? And the example that I've got is Burberry, and they last year burnt £38.7 million worth of stock to stop this going onto the counterfeit market. Now that's a really, really extreme measure of protecting your brand, and that money really could have been saved if there's mechanisms in place to do more sophisticated stock taking, make sure that these weren't produced and wasted. Really, it's a great example in the retail space of the lengths these brands would go to protect their brand, their image, and their equity. So we certainly don't want to be wasting that sort of money on search. So now let's talk about some of the brand offensive threats. So in the first instance, sadly, no brand is safe. Okay, so we're going to look at some data around that. Every brand is going to be impacted. The second one is ensuring that everyone understands the loss in brand revenues. It's very, very important to try and understand the aspect of this. As we saw in the survey earlier, a lot of people on this call now may not think there's a problem. There may be someone taking X amount of market share, but what damage is that really doing to your ROAS? And the third one, and the scariest one that we've got listed here, is really the trademark infringements. Again, going back to the data point of Google taking down the ads, you would think that this would be locked down now, particularly with some of the aggressive tactics and examples that we've got. Sadly, it is not. Trademark infringement is pretty bad. So those are the top three threats. So let's look at the first one. So no brand is safe. Of the top three verticals that we looked at on the Adthena data going out in the market, 98% of advertisers we saw are adopting a brand plus generic brand bidding strategy. So an example of that would be a brand like Progressive with the generic keywords car insurance. So we class that as brand generic. That features in 98% of the ads that we see on the Google SERP appearing. Okay, so every single piece of data that we bring back from the Google SERP, we see this as a staple part of Search Manager's search strategy. And then in half of those instances, so 50% of the advertisers we saw are adopting a very aggressive pure brand bidding strategy. Okay, so they are chasing the pure brand terms that have all the volume. So those would be the flagship, the single brands and exact match like Progressive, Expedia, and ASOS. So no brand is safe. The second one is to highlight the loss in brand revenues from brand bidding. So it really is across all of the verticals, and the data that we analyze, we see 1/3 of all searches a day are brand bidding related. And when we dive into those even further, there's 2 ads appearing on each one of those queries. So there's 2 other advertisers that are looking to still disrupt your customer journeys that are trying to find your brand. And then when we map that across our 6 top verticals here, you can see the impact on brand bidding on all of those. Something like education is sitting at 63% of that traffic is brand bidding related. In retail, it's far more long tail at 22%, but the millions behind that search is pretty enormous. And then finance is at 39%. So as you can see from all of those verticals, brand bidding is prominent in all of them. It's impacting brand revenues every day. And the third one, this is really like the no-holds-barred treatment, and you'll be surprised at some of the ads that we see out on the SERP that are really attacking these brands. Okay, so if you take, for example, the Dyson example there at the top, don't buy that Dyson. That's pretty aggressive. That's really trying to disrupt this new user that you may have spent millions on an ad campaign trying to drive through the funnel to search, and then they see an ad like this, disrupting the journey straight away. We see lots of underhand tactics, 8 reasons why not to buy, things like that. Very, very aggressive, trying to disrupt the journey. An example there for the UK as well, in Aviva, the ad they're passing off as a UK insurer. Again, all very, very disruptive and not good for the brand owner. So of all of the queries that we see on brand bidding, 19% of those searches contain trademark infringements, like the ones we've seen here. And what's more important at this phase as well is that you capture that observed data to really quantify how big an issue this is for brands. So those are the 3 tactics. So now I'm going to talk about setting your best defense. So you need to do that on an unrivaled scale. And you can do that with the whole market view with Adthena. So this is going out at scale, using machine learned data to collect every possible relevant piece of information out on the SERP to make your decisions far more strategic, planned, and well thought out. And what's happening more and more in the market today from the advertisers that we work with across the globe is how sophisticated you're at segmenting that data. So if we take, for example, the automotive sector and you're the advertiser Ford, show me who my market leaders are. Show me my closest competitors. Show me bespoke groups or competitors that I'm tracking. It's starting to get into the weeds, into the detail, and segmenting that massive data to give you the view you want. Then if you apply that to a search term category level, show me my pure brand terms. Show me what the competition is like at a California state view, and show me what's going on there. And then leveraging the empathy level, you need a customer success team to help you get to this data. Okay, you cannot go into SaaS solutions and try and prove out the data yourself with this. You need to work with humans, with search teams, with the brand manager to try and get the value out. And all of this data needs to be actionable. You need to understand how to react to these threats accordingly and measure how much impact they're taking on your brand. So today we're talking about brand protection. That's one of 5 solutions that Adthena focuses on. And the main thing that we want to highlight here, particularly from a brand perspective, the challenges are all different for CMOs. Some are losing market share in particular states. Some are being heavily attacked on specific terms. Every challenge is different, and you need to be aligned to that with a success plan and deliver measurable results. So focusing on the categorization for a second. So The AI-driven taxonomy that we mentioned in the previous slide, the torso of the data that you saw there. In yesteryear, let's look at automotive, you would group keywords by either car, used car. It'd be a very manual process, okay? So search managers and brand managers would see all the traffic coming through on brand search and say, right, I just want to have a look at this view on this specific segment. As Frederick said, the scale these days is absolutely enormous. And the real success is how you get to that detail quickly and segment that data. So I'm a windshield manufacturer in California. I just want to see which terms or which competitors are bidding on my brand, taking my traffic in that specific segment. So here at Adthena, taking automotive as an example, we've got a category of 85 groups or taxonomy that's mapped to over 1,500 that we're continually building to help you segment that data at a far quicker pace. And to underline why we're different, so we mentioned the machine-learned whole market view, where we go and get that relevant data to build that foundation. We're then driving the AI-driven data segmentation, how quickly you get to that data, and also we need to understand, we need to have the empathy there that it's built for client values and outcomes. Every person's problem, every advertiser's challenge is different. That's then underpinned by a money-back guarantee, and of course you have the world-class customer success team here at Adthena with ex-Googlers, ex-Bing, etc., driving those results for clients. And we're winning lots of awards along the way. So let's take a look at the best defense in action. Now I'm going to walk through some examples here or some insights that we've got for leading brands across the globe. So the first one, a client wanted to benchmark infringers by frequency and average position. Okay, so this is for a global travel brand, and what we've done here with the data is highlighted that Expedia are actually infringing on their brand far frequently than any other competitor in their market. So it requires immediate action from the brand owners and the search team for this particular client. So we could see they're infringing in a much higher position on a much higher frequency in various different states. So the action there was the team had to drill into the data categorization and find where these infringements were happening. And it was happening on a specific set of brand queries on a particular location. So they're under attack in an area they did not notice. And then they took that observed data, so everything that we capture on the SERP went back to the legal counsel. So the net result of that, they retained 100% brand equity and there was no further leakage. But what happened here in this instance, it's also addressed new emerging threats as well. You don't know what you don't know. And as you can see from this chart, there's a number of competitors taking market share. So they're now on the team's radar to observe as well. The next CMO benchmark was in the automotive sector. So this particular competitor wanted to profile them against another, this one advertiser wanted to profile them against another competitor. So a one-on-one view. Where is my competitor stealing my brand traffic on a specific subset of terms? So it's a categorized report based on spend and clicks on desktop and mobile. So the competitor highlighted they're investing heavily on hybrid MPV on their brand terms. The reaction was to recategorize the way they class their own search categories. Okay, so it highlighted the fact that they needed to do a better segmentation of how AdWords was grouped within their account and re-establish their aggressiveness on those terms. It also meant they had to reposition budgets. Okay, so all of these have varying CPCs and costs. So there's a much larger focus then moving forward on hybrid and MPVs to really capture that market back. So the next one, and Frederick obviously mentioned this earlier, so the gentleman's agreements. In this instance, we had an advertiser come on board. They weren't quite sure what the partner was up to in search. Okay, so they saw that the CPA was increasing over time, and they needed a more accurate view on what they were up to. So there they plugged in Adthena and the whole market view. What was staggering really was once they were plugged in, and it was looked at the whole market view, there's a 425% increase in infringements. So really this opened up this brand new lens for this advertiser to look through and say, you know, blimey, this advertiser is really, really taking advantage of the fact that I'm not on these brand and generic terms. They're also running a better price point on those terms as well. So it was a new lens that the advertiser was looking through, and then the partner in that instance was quickly brought into line and the brand CPCs were managed very quickly, and normal service resumed. The next and final example that I've got is a UK retailer. So in this instance, they needed to set up daily monitoring on a subset of brand terms, okay, here in the UK. It's a very specific competitor set, so they started with a whole market view, very robust data set. They brought it down to a very micro view, just tracking one particular infringer who was actually pushing up their CPCs and lowering their CTR on the brand terms. So that was tracked over a number of weeks. In this instance, they needed the observed data from the search engine. Okay, they needed a snapshot of what was actually going on, where and when they were appearing on devices, location, etc., etc. That evidence was then supplied to their legal counsel from the search team to then go on further. So the legal counsel were involved. It was actually settled out of court, and the advertiser was removed. Now, getting the team into this constant or this focus of monitoring, they're then able to check that the coast was clear and this particular advertiser stayed off search. So there's a fantastic result there. What this example highlights is, can you quantify the damage that someone is doing to your brand if they are appearing prominently like this? And in most cases we hear we can't. Not until the problem is solved and they go through a first case like this. And then brand teams and search teams are better prepared moving into the future with this data. So our brand protection solution, yeah, your brand is protected guaranteed. So I've got some screenshots here of the solution in the app. Interesting to note, we have more and more advertisers using this via API as well, integrated into their own dashboards, as CMOs have requested, and as I've highlighted in the previous slides, it's important to have that single view. So it's important to get to that data not only through our app, as you can see the screenshots here, but into the API as well. And you can have the unrivaled coverage with deep AI segmentation in each of those. It also comes with smart notifications, so it can alert you, or notifications are sent out for opportunities that come up, and anomaly detection as well. We also have opportunity creation and auto takedown. So in the instance that you saw with the UK retailer, you need to action that stuff pretty quickly. And here are some of the brands that are already protected by Adthena across the globe. We also work with a number of the leading agencies all around the world as well. So some great flagship clients and agencies there. So to recap, your free takeaways for today: no brand is safe. Everyone is spending on brand. Okay. The second one is the loss in brand revenues. You need to get around that with AI and machine learning. It's really key that you base these decisions and respond to this with granular segmentation. Okay, it's critical that you get to that with the right data. And the third one on brand infringement. It takes a village to protect your brand. Okay, so that means from the CMO to the search team to the brand team and legal teams, everyone needs to be committed to this to get this resolved. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for watching. I'm going to hand you back now to Karen.
Thank you, Ashley. Great information, scary information out there, folks, right? There's so many things we have to be vigilant about in online marketing today. We've gotten some questions coming in for both Ashley and Frederick now, so I want to make sure that we have time to try and answer quite a few of them. Audience, if you're out there and you've got a question you want to ask but you haven't submitted it yet, please go ahead and do that. We're going to get started right away. Okay, so let me put this first question up. We're going to see it in your slide area, and I'm going to read it and then direct it to one of our speakers first. So, Frederick, I'm going to start with you on this because you have mentioned somewhere along the way about Google laughing all the way to the bank. So our attendee wants to know, how do I deal with the rising CPCs on my brand terms, right? Because you want to be the highest bid on your own brand terms, but it's costing a lot of money. Do you have any suggestions for some of our search marketers out there trying to deal with this?
Yeah, exactly, Karen. And so you actually don't want to be the highest bid, but you want to have the highest position at the lowest bid. And I guess that's what the question is about, right? So one tactic to achieve that is to just give Google as many extensions as possible. So they really want you as a brand as the one perfect answer to that branded query. they want you to be in the first position, but they also will need to make money, right? So the more that you can take advantage of all of the extension types that make sense for you, that basically gives the user more opportunity to click on your ad. It drives up your CTR. The CTR leads to a better quality score, and that's when Google can start to actually discount how much you pay for those clicks. Now, as far as the competitors coming in, they obviously do bump up your price a little bit as well, right? So there's two things happening. There's a pricing threshold that Google puts in place for you to be on the top of the page, and then there's also the price pressure from competitors below you. And that's where I think you got to pay attention to what Ashley's saying, right? Just look who's doing this, try to talk to them. I know for my company, we often have gentlemen's agreements where we just, hey, it's a big space, we're competing, but there's enough business for everyone to go around, so let's stay out of each other's ways. And then ultimately, I think it also comes down a little bit to measuring beyond CPCs, right? So the CPC is ultimately not what you care about, probably. You care about cost per acquisition, profitability. And, obviously you could be more profitable with a lower CPC, but that's really the first thing that I would look at is, am I still able to advertise here and make a profit for myself?
Ashley, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, it's just critical that you have the right data to make these these decisions. If it keeps CPCs keep increasing, as to why. Do you have the data to support which area, if it is a particular state in the US or a specific competitor boosting or increasing those CPCs? Find the area and the reasons why. Yes, you can be reactive and keep increasing, but that's like we said, a race to the top. You need an informed strategy to beat these, and you do need best practice. You need to utilize every ad extension that's available, but also look at your offer. Are they undercutting you? Are they saying something pretty bad in their ads? Then you may need to kind of build a legal case around that as well. So first and foremost, I think it's understanding the issue.
And to build on what Ashley's saying, I mean, I have a funny example somewhat, but one major brand at one point was complaining to Google that we were raising their CPCs too much for their branded keyword. And they were like, how can you possibly raise the cost so much and tell us we have a bad quality score on this keyword? And we looked at the data, and guess who the competition was? It was the same company, but the organic team. They had done such a good job of optimizing that. People were just going to the organic result in droves, and nobody was clicking on the ad because the offer, like Ashley was saying, just wasn't good enough in the ad. And so Google, there's a wall between SEO and PPC, and so they were just saying, well, people like the organic results, so we're going to actually charge much more for the paid results. So it could even be internal competition in some cases.
Interesting. Okay. Let's go on. This is a question. Ashley, this came up in some of your last couple of slides there, so I want to make sure we explain this to this attendee. Are you referencing the infringement in ad copy, or are they saying they have been able to go after competitors bidding on keywords? Just curious about the difference. So maybe you can clarify that, Ashley?
Sure. So it's infringement in ad copy. So instances where we see in the ad copy they're using a brand where they shouldn't be.
Okay, good. That was nice and simple. Let's take a look at this question. This person brings up a good point. And Ashley, I'll keep going with you, and then we'll get to Frederick. I don't have the time to spare to manage all these infringements that come through. How can I be efficient at protecting my brand? So try and get at what I would wonder on this is, who's supposed to be monitoring this? Like, we know Adthena will handle some of it, but who within the digital marketing or marketing organization should be responsible for brand safety?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and we hear that one a lot. So it goes back to the empathy piece where obviously you do need the human element in here. We hear that advertisers are super stretched on time. It's a big job to manage. So you need to get the balance on how you digest our data on a daily basis. And coming into the team. So that's about defining the workflow. So if we could get that to you via API and you create your own dashboard, or you have a customer success representative that has the dashboard set up with Adthena and it's co-managed there's all these scenarios that can play out. But it's a very critical one that we need to answer in the first instance on solving this brand issue. Is defining the workflows, because we appreciate that everyone is super taxed on time, and we need to manage this effectively, basically.
Frederick, I'm sure you've got an opinion on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think automation, right? Like if you read any of my stuff on search engine land, it's automation, automation, automation. And it's interesting how Ashley's saying that rules-based automation is not the full answer, and I completely agree with that. I mean, these things are so complex and there's so many data points, so if you can bring in a level of artificial intelligence to make some of those decisions for you, that's really helpful. And I think ultimately what I see in the tool space, whether you're looking at Adthena or an AdWords tool, it's really about having the artificial intelligence make some good starting decisions and present them to you so that you can make that final judgment on what's what. You know, classic story from the early days of PayPal. PayPal was losing a lot of money, and they were losing money because there was so much ad fraud happening. And so they tried to solve it through pure artificial intelligence, and that failed because it was too aggressive. A lot of correct transactions were getting shut down. And then they tried to solve it with humans, and that failed because they needed 10,000 humans to do this, and they were too slow, and it was just too costly. And then they said, well, let's actually put humans and AI together so that the AI gives the humans a limited list of what's probably worth investigating, and now they could be successful at it. And I think it's exactly the same in this space, right? Like use the technology to tell you what you need to pay attention to, and then that your limited time now you actually have the ability to make the decisions you need to look at.
Okay, let's try and squeeze in one more here that, Frederick, I'm going to stick with you on this because you mentioned this first in your presentation. With the potential risks of negative brand adjacency, right, of who you wind up next to, do you recommend I only target placements proactively, or is there a way I can still advertise everywhere while protecting my brand?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So, and I think the whole beauty of the internet is that whole long tail element and the fact that there are so many places where you can advertise, and some of these places are really super relevant to your protective customers. So I don't like just saying wholesale, I'm not going to do display, or I'm just going to target a number of placements. I think this whole artificial intelligence that Google's deploying to find new good places to show your ad, those are great, but all you have to do is be somewhat proactive to take a look at it and say, hey, Google, are you doing a good job? Because as many efforts as they have to clean this up, they're not perfect, right? So the more that we can help them through the tools that we use, through Adthena, you know, it really puts us in a position where we can take advantage of the long tail, where there's really good exposure available that can help us build more brands. And we just have to be careful that we don't fall in the trap of being too complacent, and then it ends up hurting our brand.
Ashley, I'll give you the last word here.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think obviously it just comes back to the scale, automation, and knowing your competition. You need all of those, and it is a challenge for CMOs, brand managers, and search managers to get across all of that. So you need to leverage the technology and the insights to make those decisions.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. So I want to thank Frederick and Ashley for a very informative and timely presentation. And I want to thank you, audience, for your great questions. We had a couple more there that we didn't have time for, but we are going to pass them all along to our friends at Adthena for some follow-up. So you'll get some answers. I do want to give a special thank you to Adthena as our sponsor today, and you can visit them, as you see here, at www.adthena.com. That's all for our broadcast today. We look forward to seeing you next time, right here at Digital Marketing.